Okay, so what do a tiger's paw, a modern cargo ship, and an international treaty have in common? It might sound like the start of a weird riddle, but the answer actually holds the key to how our entire modern world functions. Let's connect the dots between ancient curious artifacts and the massive invisible webs that govern literally everything we buy today. Welcome to our explainer on the architecture of global commerce. We're going to zoom way out, starting from the absolute simplest human exchanges and expanding all the way to the sprawling physical and political infrastructure of international trade. I promise you, once we uncover the hidden architecture behind how things get to us, you'll probably never look at the everyday items in your home the exact same way again. To make sense of this massive topic, we are going to use a step-by-step zoom-out approach. We'll start with from barter to global commerce, then explore why do nations trade, gateways of global commerce, the mechanics of modern trade, governing global commerce, and we'll wrap up with the free trade paradox. Section 1, from barter to global commerce. Now, let's start small. Imagine you are a potter who desperately needs a plumber. Under the early barter system, direct exchange was literally your only option. You'd have to go out and find a plumber who specifically needed your pots, right at that exact moment. It's highly mutually beneficial when it works, but man, it's incredibly difficult to coordinate. Early societies brilliantly solved that whole barter bottleneck by introducing money. But, well, before paper or coins, they used rare objects that had high intrinsic value. We're talking about things like flintstones, obsidian, cowrie shells, and yes, even tiger's paws, whale's teeth, and peppercorns. I mean, carrying around a pocket full of whale's teeth sounds completely chaotic, right? But it was a real game changer. It was a vital innovation that allowed human trade networks to finally expand. And over the centuries, the physical scale of that trade just exploded. In ancient times, it was mostly luxury items traveling along the massive 6,000-kilometer Silk Route. By the 15th century, European colonialism brought highly lucrative but utterly devastating practices, including the profound tragedy of the slave trade. Then, the 18th century Industrial Revolution demanded massive, unprecedented amounts of raw materials. Eventually, post-World War II tariff reductions ushered us right into the incredibly complex modern era of commerce we know today. Section 2, why do nations trade? So the absolutely crucial question we have to ask next is, why do modern nations actually need to trade with each other at all? Why not just make everything at home and call it a day? Well, the short answer is simply differences. The world's resources are completely, entirely, unevenly distributed. A country's underlying geology dictates its mineral wealth. Climate dictates agriculture. You can really only grow cocoa or bananas in the tropics, while producing wool requires much colder regions. Add in specialized cultural expertise, like crafting prized Iranian carpets, and varying stages of economic development, and you get a very clear picture. No single country has it all. We literally have to rely on each other. Moving right along to Section 3, gateways of global commerce. Because having the goods is one thing, but physically getting them across an ocean, that is an entirely different beast. To handle this massive, mind-boggling global volume, the world relies on highly specialized ports, the true gateways of international trade. And they're generally categorized into three main buckets, based on what they carry. Industrial ports handle the heavy lifting, dealing with bulk cargo like grain, sugar, and oil. Commercial ports manage general packaged products and passengers. And then we have the comprehensive ports. These are the absolute giants that handle the whole shebang, both bulk and general cargo in staggering volumes. A really fascinating, specific example of this specialization is the entrepot port. Instead of just serving its own local population, it acts entirely as a strategic global collection and redistribution hub. Basically, goods arrive from various countries for the sole purpose of being exported right back out again. Singapore does this incredibly well for Asia, and Rotterdam does it for Europe. They are essentially the ultimate staging grounds for world commerce. Section 4, the mechanics of modern trade. Now that we've seen the physical gateways, let's peek under the hood at how the modern world actually organizes all these goods moving through them. You might just assume that global trade is a totally equal free-for-all among hundreds of independent nations. But get this, a staggering 52% of all global trade is generated by just 120 regional trade blocs. These are countries that are geographically close to each other, teaming up to remove tariffs exclusively among themselves. So it turns out regional cooperation is actually the dominant engine driving the entire world economy. Section 5, governing global commerce. As we zoom out even further, we encounter the incredibly complex, invisible political agreements that govern these regional blocs and nations on the world stage. Nations tend to structure these relationships primarily in two ways. Bilateral agreements are strictly one-on-one. Country A agrees to buy a specific item from country B, and vice versa. It's very targeted. Multilateral networks, on the other hand, are conducted among many countries all at once. A country might grant what's called most favored nation status to certain partners, creating an expansive, deeply interconnected web. Each method shapes the global economy in vastly different ways. Okay, we really have to slow down here for a second, because understanding the balance of trade is absolutely crucial to grasping how nations behave. A positive balance means a country exports more value than it imports, which is a fantastic position to be in. But a negative balance, that's dangerous. If a country constantly buys more from the world than it earns by selling, it'll ultimately exhaust its financial reserves. It's essentially a tipping point that governments desperately try to avoid. To manage all these delicate balances and the inevitable commercial disputes that pop up, the World Trade Organization, or the WTO, was established in 1995. Headquartered over in Geneva, Switzerland, it essentially serves as the central umpire for global commerce. It's literally the only international organization dealing with the global rules of trade, covering everything from agriculture to telecommunications to intellectual property. Which brings us to Section 6, the free trade paradox. Because, as you might expect, the actions of the WTO and this relentless global push for total free trade has sparked some intense, ongoing debates worldwide. We want to look at this totally impartially, because both sides present really significant arguments. Supporters argue that free trade strongly encourages regional specialization, equalizes prices, and drives a wonderful diffusion of shared knowledge and higher production globally. On the flip side, though, critics warn it often creates uneven growth, actually widening the gap between rich and poor nations. Furthermore, aggressive multinational expansion often comes at a severe environmental cost. Think deforestation and marine depletion, while sometimes entirely ignoring basic workers' rights and health. So take a look at the physical objects around you right now. Just pick one. Consider the massive invisible network of specialized ports, regional trade blocs, and historical treaties that all work together to bring that item right to you. It's an absolute marvel of human cooperation. But it leaves us with a vital question to ponder. As global commerce continues to accelerate at breakneck speed, can we successfully balance the pursuit of profit with the preservation of our planet? Is infinite expansion truly sustainable?